It's been 1 year since the 7th of October 2023. There are things that I want to talk about. I don't really have an order in my head, just some thoughts which are flowing. I was 8 months pregnant on the 7th of October. And the 6th of October was such a special day. And to explain why it was a special day, and it also explains the Nova Music Festival and the festival, the Jewish festival that was taking place. You have to kind of understand Israel and Judaism a little bit, because what followed was so shocking on so many different ways and so many different levels. But because in my own experience, and the decisions that I took and the help that I received, I ended up being a period outside of Israel. Immediately afterwards, I am so aware of the level of ignorance about Judaism and about Israel. So, this may ramble. So I'm just going to address this video for anyone who is watching. In 2024, when you look at this video, you might see me and you might think that I'm white. But I'm not. I'm Jewish. And if you don't understand what I mean by that, then rather than jumping to judgment as to where I'm coming from or what I mean when I say that, I would invite you to imagine in your mind a moment of pause where you have like a number of doors in front of you, and on top of the doors there's a number of labels, and each door, there's a few doors which are open, and labelled on the doors which are open are your immediate reactions when I say I'm not white. She's saying that because, what a load of nonsense, I'm not going to believe, whatever your possibly negative judgments in reaction to me saying that. And then there'll be another door, and it has a label on it saying, I don't know. Well, I don't know that I don't know, because you don't know. Jewish people are an ancient people. I might say that because you've been brainwashed. There'll be another space for all I know in your brain which blathers on about nonsense about Kazakhs. Go to the end of the corridor and look at the door that says, well, I don't know that I don't know. You can't go about your life lecturing other people about lived experiences and ignoring mine. And maybe I'll say that maybe you hate Jewish people. You're not anti-Semitic, but blah, 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 blah. Well, you say that, what about the experiences of X? Again, why don't you just walk to the end of the corridor in your mind, get to the door that says, well, I don't know that I don't know. We're an ancient people. About 15 years ago, I was with friends of friends in a country in the Far East as their guests, and these friends of friends were very establishment British in their own way, and Guardian readers, and were educated and had a very strong self-image of their level of education and intellectual prowess. And I remember that very clearly in the conversation that he came out with something really dumb, like that the Prophet Muhammad predated Christianity, which he knew intellectually wasn't true. And it showed up in something he said, and I pointed it out. And the reason that he had that lazy slip up in his mind is because I think there's a weird phenomenon in Western guilt and outlook that perhaps because of the breakdown of the traditional family, perhaps there's a latent, suppressed admiration for people who are willing to die for their beliefs in the face of the vast secular emptiness of post-Christian Western society, that they have an idea that there's something very authentic and admirable about, as they see it, a religion where one is prepared to die for their beliefs in the sense of self-sacrifice, because it's the opposite in its own way of an individualistic Western society. And together with that authenticity comes an association that it's more grounded in the earth and more ancient. But Islam is a very modern religion compared to Christianity. And of course, Christianity is extremely modern compared to Judaism, Jesus being a nice Jewish boy. Judaism is an agricultural religion. The festivals tie into, with the exception of the New Year, the new moon. And the moon is what sets the Jewish calendar, and the moon is what sets the agricultural calendar, and the moon is what sets the weather here in Israel, where Judaism is from, and where Christianity is from, because Jesus is a nice Jewish boy, and where Islam is not from, except in a dream of the Prophet Muhammad. The West fail quite often to recognize the successionist aspect of Islam, in which it is a religion that has spread historically through conquering. Christianity historically being a proselytizing religion, meaning it has spread through preaching and introducing a new belief system, and Islam in a different way. And the lack of awareness of this can be seen by not understanding, for example, that the ancient Jewish temples are underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They came first. And I'm not a fan at all of Jewish prayer on Temple Mount, for religious reasons, apart from socio-political reasons. But and my attitude is reflected by the majority of Jews in Israel and worldwide. However, I think that it's safe to say that if you look at the head of the Shas political party and the amount of moderate Jews and blah blah blah, I think that's a very fair comment and not a mischaracterization. However, that very moderate, respectful viewpoint does not mean that I deny that our temple is underneath Al-Aqsa Mosque. I'm well aware of it. That's why the Western Wall is just like the outer wall of what the temple used to be. And if we go back to the Friends, those 15 or so years ago, he looked at me, and this is all on the subconscious level, but doesn't understand that I'm more of the real deal than a Muslim, definitely a Muslim who's not white-skinned and comes from a place in the world where Islam was never there from Arabia, but was through conquering quite a while ago, a few hundred years ago, 1,000 years ago, whatever it was. He doesn't understand that my connection is more here. Like, I'm from the more ancient people. We wrote the Bible. Look up the poem by Leonard Cohen. I'm the little Jew who wrote the Bible. It's not the poem, it's a song after the 67 war. And there is actually a problem, because if I were to crudely characterize the West at the moment, the washing machine's just finished, the Muslim population would have an Islamic point of view of Jewish people, which will vary across the different areas, sects of Islam, but it will largely be coming from an Islamist historical point of view, which is of a religion which came way after Judaism and which spread by forcing non-Muslims to convert and Jews to convert. Not all Jews, but you might want to look into the history of Islam. And because the Western Christian populations are over the years increasingly having less children and increasingly secular and devoid of Christian education, there is a huge amount of ignorance about the history of religion and the most basic fundamentals, and which religion is the most indigenous, which religion came first. People just don't know. And so they form impressions in their mind. And they form impressions according to what they're exposed to, but more than that, what they feel familiar with. So now I will detour a little bit just into some behavioral psychology to explain something as to why it is that we are so polarized. Because obviously algorithms and the tail wagging the dog and echo chambers on social media, and because we get our news from social media, is widely identified as an issue. But there's another issue that I'd like to point out, which is based on the work of the Israeli-American academics Tversky and Kahneman. I believe it's them. I will link below to where it came from in case I'm wrong. But it's called comparative ignorance hypothesis, and this is something that I identified as a cause. Maybe others have identified it too, I don't know. They did a study, and I'm paraphrasing what the study said, but it was something like this. They wanted to see how willing people are to take a position and to make a bet on it, kind of invest, double down on it, if they felt knowledgeable about an issue despite being ignorant, compared to being aware that they were ignorant about something. So they took a load of, I think it was American high school students in an area where they had no connection to the country Turkey or the immigrants from Turkey, like no participating student, or maybe it's a university student, would know anything about Turkey in particular. And they divided the groups into a regular group and a control group, and they asked them to make a bet on I believe it was the weather of Turkey. And they had the control group that really didn't know anything about Turkey, but the other group was psychologically primed to feel a greater sense of familiarization about Turkey. I think it was talking about Turkish soccer, football. And what they found is that when they asked the students how much they would bet on their guess about the weather in Turkey in the summer, or Istanbul, or whatever, those that had been primed to feel that Turkey was familiar to them because of knowing about Turkish soccer were much more likely to risk higher amounts, even though they were aware that they'd never been to Turkey and they don't know about Turkey. So just having in their mind the idea about Turkish soccer, and then being asked about the weather, which is one thing that's got nothing to do with the other, they felt that they knew more. And if you are watching this, and I say I'm from Israel, it already feels familiar because of all of the things you hear about Israel, even though you might be completely ignorant about myself as a Jew, Jewish history, Israel, what the people are like, what the countries are like. You've got all of these ideas. And I want to add that there has been I think it would now be at least 2 or 3 decades of misinformation about Israel coming through. And I can almost hear the little triggers. What? Israel has Bahrain, Jews controlling, like all this crap. Again, if I say something and it's triggering, go into your mind, go to the end of the corridor and find the door that says what you don't know that you don't know. Because there's so many things I can and I want to say to counteract what I'm imagining are the triggers that you're having listening to that. But it's so vast that I can't say it all at the same time. And I think that's a big problem in general when breaking down dogma, because dogma is normally fairly simple and it's like supported by all these crutches, and the crutches that support it are automatic defenses about that anyone trying to bring in reality will say, so that you don't hear what I'm saying, you're defending against it. It's very unfortunate. So comparative ignorance hypothesis, just to draw that to a conclusion, means that if you've been exposed to Israel but never really understood the fundamentals, you might think you know the fundamentals, but you're unaware of your ignorance, you're likely to actually double down on your opinion, because other studies in behavioral psychology show that once we have an opinion, we kind of, you could say that we associate our ego and our identity to it, and we're more likely to double down. If you show contradictory evidence, somebody is more likely to double down on their opinion. Now, I've been thinking about this problem for a while, because there's very few Jewish people in the world compared to the world population. There's something that was noticed after the Second World War where racial prejudice in the United States was broken down by black and white soldiers serving together in army units, and because of sort of working together and just being exposed to somebody whom they might have been socially cut off from and imbued with some kind of prejudices, the level of prejudices went down. And it's not uncommon for, if you speak with a Jewish person or an Israeli, that they will say they can recall a conversation with someone who's non-Jewish, who said, wow, I never met a Jew before, I had no idea, I had all these ideas. It's incredibly common to meet tourists in Israel who aren't Jewish, who say, this is absolutely nothing like I imagined. I used to be an Airbnb host. Or Israel is absolutely not what I imagined, or Israeli people are absolutely not what I imagined. Like, whatever impression people are getting from outside of Israel, it's very clear to me that the reality is very different. But because people are exposed to so much from the media, they double down on their existing prejudices. There's another layer on top of that, which we can add, which has like made this problem worse, And it was illustrated to me about nearly 20 years ago, I don't know. A friend from university was producing a program called The World's Strictest Parents, and I was brought on as a researcher. And I had to find families for a show hosted in Israel. So the premise of the show is reality TV, where you took two sort of out of control British teenagers who were kind of annoying and didn't have any boundaries in the UK. And the reality TV program took them to a typical traditional family in another country or culture, and followed them for, I think, 10 days, and then kind of did a before and after, and followed the conflicts and how it was resolved, and if it had a longer term impact on how they got on with their parents back in the UK. So I was tasked to finding an Israeli family, and I found the most amazing families for the production team who then came to Israel to meet them. I found a couple in Dimona, and they're very typical Israelis as well, in their own way, but they're kind of unusual but typical, and really reflected what it's like living here and the amazing people here. So there was a teacher, she was a teacher, and he was a tour guide in Dimona. In order to educate his pupils, he would take a donkey from Dimona, I think it was Dimona or Arad, like a desert town, to Jerusalem every year in the harvest festivals, because I think to illustrate like the ancient Jewish festivals at the temple, and I think that the Messiah is meant to come on a donkey, and I think she worked with regular kids or maybe special needs kids, and they were kind of strict but very loving. There was another couple who were also pretty amazing. They fostered lots of kids. He was an army guy, like a great guy. She was great. They believed in discipline and responsibility, and they were warm and they were loving. And they were all Israeli. I think I'm just trying to remember the other couple that I found. There's a third couple that I found, but it escapes me at the moment. I have the notes somewhere, I hope. But the family that the production team chose was a family who just moved to Israel from the States, who spoke perfect American English. They weren't like Israelis with an English with an Israeli accent, but perfectly understandable. And they basically were very reminiscent of the American settler types that the BBC, in its very biased reporting at the time, tended to exclusively interview, giving a very wrong impression about who Israelis are, like we're just kind of like an American outpost. And I pushed back on it politely and asked why, because this was not a typical Israeli family at all. It's not fulfilling what the brief was. And the response I got was interesting. It made me think about the dynamics which have been emerging in the media and why we're so far from the truth 2 decades on. The first was that they said that there's a concept for TV audiences of framing, in that an American accent was familiar to the audience, and the production company the production company didn't have like an eternal contract with Channel 4. From season to season they had to produce these episodes. They would hope that another season would be commissioned, and the decision to commission another season was based on whether viewers would keep on watching, because if the viewers found the subject matter hard or meaty or challenging, it would be too taxing on them and they would switch channels. And if they switch channels, then they wouldn't see the adverts. And if they don't see the adverts, then the amount that the TV channel could charge for the advertising space in between, because there was advertising breaks in the program, would go down. Therefore, they had to tailor the content as much as possible so that the viewers would keep on watching and wouldn't switch channels. So they didn't want to challenge in any way the viewer. And the team behind the documentary were in no way anti-Israel or political. I could see that. They were not coming from that at all. They had no opinions on Israel. They were, what they knew, what they didn't know, and they weren't prejudiced people, and they were just coming to shoot this episode. But because most people would have had an impression of Israel from the BBC as being populated by Americans who came in yesterday and have no connection to the land and don't have an accent, and it's just like Los Angeles in Israel, which is what this family was like. They're from Los Angeles. Very nice family, but like not a typical Israeli family at all. Whereas when you saw the episode on India, it was like they had Indian accent and a more typical Indian family, but it fit into existing prejudices. So whenever you challenge somebody's prejudices, it's taxing for them. And why would you do that tax? And then I understood as well that it's to do with the market economy, because when I graduated from university, which was back in 95, you didn't necessarily sign up at the BBC if that's the path you took and got a job for life. But at that point in time in 1995, if you would go and meet senior people at the BBC, they'd been working there forever. Whereas since then the industry had gone through a change where, just like you didn't have a job for life and it used to be highly unusual to be made redundant, people change jobs every 2 years. It used to be looked at that you're a bad worker if you're changing jobs every 2 years. Now it's just part of the course. So the production company wouldn't do anything to risk not being commissioned again to they wouldn't do that. So whereas in the past, if there was security in the media industry, then reporters might push back towards pushing hard and difficult truths because they knew that they had job security, they wouldn't do that